I'm going to tell you a story from the Isle of Man. This is a story about a girl called Kiri, and she lived with her dad on a small farm on the coast of the Isle of Man. Now, Kiri had never been off the Isle of Man, she'd never been to sea, but her dad had been a sailor when he was young. So he had lots of seafaring friends who would pop in and visit Kiri and her dad when they were passing the Isle of Man in their boats. And sailors are splendid storytellers. And all of these visitors would tell Kiri and her dad tales from all over the other Celtic lands. And as Kiri grew up listening to these tales, she realised that the same kinds of magic and monsters often appeared in similar stories from different Celtic lands. Monsters particularly would reappear, different names in different stories. Water horses galloped through stories from lots of the Celtic lands. Wonderful, scary shapeshifters who would turn into beautiful horses in order to eat people or steal them away to be their servants. So Kiri loved hearing all these stories. Donald would visit and he would tell stories of the Scottish Kelpie who could shapeshift into gorgeous, elegant horses or beautiful people to lure children into lochs to drown and devour them. Dafydd, when he visited, would tell stories of the Welsh Ceffyl Dor, a horse that if anyone ever tried to harness it to a cart or a plough would drown whoever had dared to put these things on the horse. Or Dermot would tell stories of the Irish Afishka, a horse so fast that people loved to ride them, wanted to ride them in races, but if they got on the horse's back, the horse would gallop into the sea, taking the rider under the waves, never to be seen again. And after hearing all these fabulous tales, Kiri's dad would say, "Oh, but we have water horses too. The Manx water horse is called a Glacian, and it's every bit as handsome, every bit as dangerous as all its Celtic cousins." And all of these stories from all of these places conveniently contained information about how to escape from water horses in their human or horse form. For example, running water, you jumped over running water, you could be safe, or waiting for morning cockcrow, or waving a Bible, or wielding an iron blade. And Kiri loved listening to these stories. Partly because she knew these stories were centuries old and also that magic tended to stay safely inside stories. So Kiri was confident she would never meet a water horse. One evening, just after Kiri's 16th birthday, a storm started to roll in from the sea. Kiri and her dad were in the farmhouse getting supper ready, and they could hear the wind and the rain battering the cottage. And just as they were getting ready to have supper, they heard a at the door. Kiri's dad opened the door, and there on the doorstep was a young man, no older than Kiri, and he was completely soaking wet. His fancy, quite old-fashioned clothes, blue silks and green velvets, were absolutely dripping water, and his hair, long and dark, was heavy and covering most of his face. And he spoke to Kiri's dad in a strange language that neither Kiri or her dad understood. But Kiri's dad said, "Oh, I don't need to know what you're saying, lad. I know what you need. Come on in, sit down by the hot fire and we'll get some hot food inside you." And the young man sat down and watched as Kiri was finishing off the supper. He watched as she was stirring the soup and slicing the bread, and he watched as she served supper on the table, and he nodded approvingly and smiled in thanks. And they all ate their supper and then sat back down by the fire. And by the warmth of the fire, Kiri's dad dozed off, as he usually did after a hard day's working in the fields. And Kiri got on with some more chores. She was sewing buttons on shirts, she was darning socks, and the young man watched her careful stitching and he nodded in approval. And then eventually, in the warmth, as he was drying off, he dozed off by the fire too. Kiri was now the only one awake. She could still hear the storm battering the cottage, but there were still chores to do. She had to go outside and check everything was put away for the night. So she put down her sewing and she opened the door, she went outside and she ran across the rainy, windy farmyard, running in the moonlight, got all the way to the farm gate, rattled it to check it was locked. Then she ran, wind, rain, towards the barn, opened the door, looked inside, and she saw that the little red cockerel they were fattening up for their Christmas dinner was roosting safely on the rafters. She checked that all the tools she and her dad had used that day were clean and put away neatly. And she closed the barn door and she ran through the wind and the rain back to the farm cottage, opened the door, and a gust of wind blew in as she opened the door. And this gust of wind whirled round the cottage. And as it whirled round the cottage, it lifted the newly dry hair up off the young stranger's face. And as the hair was lifted up, Kitty caught a glimpse of his ear. It was a long ear. It was a pointed ear. It was a hairy ear. It was a horse's ear. Kitty knew suddenly what her dad had let in to their home. A water horse, a Glashan, sitting there by their fire. And Kitty stood in the doorway and she whispered, "Dad, Dad." But her dad didn't wake up. So she whispered again, a wee bit more loudly, "Dad!" Now, her dad still didn't wake up, but the water horse woke up. He opened his storm grey eyes, he looked straight at Kitty and he stood up. Kitty was standing there in the doorway thinking, all those ways in the stories of escaping from water horses, what were they? What were they? Running water, yes. But the nearest stream was 2 fields away. Morning cockcrow. Yeah, but their cockerel was away in the barn asleep, and morning wasn't for hours. What else? A Bible. There was a Bible in her dad's bedroom. Iron blades. There were knives where she'd been preparing supper, but the water horse was coming towards her. He was standing between her and anything useful in the cottage. She had to get him away. She had to get him out of her house. She had to get him away from her sleeping father. So Kitty turned and ran out into the stormy farmyard, and she ran towards the barn with the water horse chasing her because she realised there were iron blades in there. A lot of the tools she'd checked just moments ago were iron blades. So she ran towards the barn. She reached out, she grabbed the door, she pulled it open. But before she could reach in and grab an iron blade, the water horse grabbed her arm and pulled her back. And now Kitty and the water horse were standing in the barn doorway in the rain, and the water horse spoke to her. He used that strange language that neither her or her dad had understood. And he spoke quite softly and kind of soothingly and calmly, like her dad spoke to the animals on the farm. And as he was speaking, he was using the one hand that he wasn't using to hold Kitty to mime, to gesture. He was miming stirring, slicing, serving, sewing. Then he pointed at Kitty and then he pointed out at sea. And then again, stirring, slicing, serving, sewing. And Kitty thought, does he want me to be his servant in his home under the sea? I suppose being a water horse's servant is better than being a water horse's supper, but it's not what I'd planned for my life. So she shook her head. No, she said, no, I don't want to be your servant. The water horse stuck his hand in his fancy velvet jacket pocket, pulled out a string of pearls and offered the pearls to Kitty. No, she said, no, even if my wages would be pearls, I don't want to be your servant. He snarled, the water horse snarled, shoved his pearls back into his pocket, and he started to pull Kitty. He started to haul and try and drag her towards the sea. Kitty dug her heels in and resisted, tried not to be pulled, and she shouted, "Dad! Dad! Help!" But the wind whipped her words away and her dad didn't hear her. So she was trying not to be dragged away and the water horse was hauling on her and pulling. And Kitty reached out, she grabbed the frame of the barn door and she held on, and the water horse was dragging and pulling and roaring in frustration. And Kitty saw his long white teeth and thought, oh, I wonder if why he needs a servant is because he ate his last servant as his supper. And she held on tight and the water horse was hauling on her. And Kitty's fingers started to slip on the door frame. She knew that she had to find a different way to escape from him. So she took her hand off the door frame. She said, maybe I'll have those pearls after all. She grabbed the pearls out of the water horse's pocket and she flung them into the barn. She aimed really carefully at the little red cockerel on the rafter in the barn. She flung the pearls. They hit the cockerel right in the middle of the chest, and rudely awoken and terribly offended, the cockerel said, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo." And as soon as he heard the cockerel, the Glacian thought it was dawn. He thought it was morning when he had to be back in the sea. So he let go of Kitty and he ran off. And the morning cockcrow, early morning cockcrow, had woken Kitty's dad too, wondered why the cockerel was crowing in the middle of the night. So he ran out into the farmyard. So Kitty and her dad, standing in the moonlight in the rainy farmyard, they saw the water horse shapeshift, bit by bit, as he ran to the sea. First bit to change with the young stranger's legs, turned into the back legs of a horse to hurdle the farm gate. Then his arms turned into a horse's front legs, his hands and his feet turning into hooves. Then his torso turned into a horse's belly and back. So it was a stallion with a man's head that was running towards the sea. Then the young man's head turned into a horse's head. And it was a beautiful, huge black stallion that leapt into the stormy waves and vanished into the sea. And Kitty told her dad about the pearls and the cockerel and how she managed to send the Glacian back into the sea. And her dad said, "Oh, it was your cleverness and that bird's voice that saved you. So I think we should eat something different for our Christmas dinner this year." And Kitty agreed. So the little red cockerel lived a long and happy life. So did Kitty and her dad. But the pearls only lasted that one night. Kitty put them on her windowsill when she went to bed. And when true dawn came, the pearls turned to sea foam and drifted off on the breeze. Kitty didn't mind though. She'd never wanted to earn wages from a water horse. And this gave her a story she could tell next time someone visited the house. And that is the story of Kitty and how she escaped from a water horse.